A very This segment is brought to you courtesy of Caribbean American Weekly, a newspaper owned and operated by Caribbean Americans. Read the latest edition at www.cawnyc.com. That's www.cawnyc.com. To like us on Facebook, to advertise or to subscribe, visit us at www.cawnyc.com. That's www.cawnyc.com. To advertise with the Caribbean American Weekly publication for freelance assignments to distribute at your business place, visit us at www.cawnyc.com. That's www.cawnyc.com. Or to meet a marketing representative at our office, call 718-771-0988. That's 718-771-0988. Very warm welcome to everyone. We are joined by an extra special guest, Dr. Julius Garvey, who will share the latest news on Justice for Garvey effort seeking an exoneration for the Honorable Marcus Garvey by asking President Biden to grant a posthumous presidential pardon and clear his name. Welcome, sir. It's such an honor to have you here with us today.
It's my pleasure to be with you, and thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So tell us about your father, the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and his historic role as a civil rights leader.
Well, basically my father came to this country in 1916. He had formed the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League in 1914 in Jamaica, and essentially brought that here to the United States, where he created the new headquarters here in 1918. So this was basically a human rights organization, if you will, because it was both anti-colonial as well as civil rights here in the United States. But of course, it was aiming at the colonial powers, which, as we know, the Caribbean was basically under British and French colonialism. There was still some German colonialism at that point in time. Germany had not been defeated by World War II, etc. So, the European powers had carved up Africa in 1884, 1885. So the African world, both in terms of African and diaspora, was controlled by Euro-America, if you will. Organization that my father created was anti-colonial in its widest perspective. Mm-hmm. And within a country like the United States, of course, it was basically a civil rights organization, because this was a period when, there had been a large movement from the South, an agricultural economy, to the North, an industrial economy, because willing hands, if you will, were needed for the war effort of 1914, 1918, the mechanics of making rifles and bullets, etc., as well as uniforms and instruments of war. So there was that large movement, so a new era for African Americans. They came from the sharecropping of the South, which, as you know, there was no reconstruction in the South. So after slavery, the slaves got nothing. They were basically thrown out on their own, no boots, let alone bootstraps. So this was a milieu in which my father existed, and the organization was birthed. And it was a program then to unite all African people, because that was seen as our major strength. If we had unity, then we could combat, if you will, or at least resist the forces that had enslaved us, and that we had fought for our freedom. And we had to then manifest our liberation in terms of structuring systems of governance, systems of economic, systems of education, systems of healthcare for ourselves. This was not provided by the people who had enslaved us. They were still treating us inhumanely. So that was the basis of the organization, a foundation for the reconstruction of African civilization.
And thank you so much for that. And your father was way ahead of his time. And, you know, some of the things that he's talking about way back then, it is still so applicable today.
You're 100%. Of course, you know, we've had the George Floyd, you know, public murder, and we have soon, you know, you've seen so many others in terms of Arbery and many more, and it's you know, how should I say, discouraging to see that there's been a lack of movement, shall we say, in terms of the picture here in the United States in the last 100 years. You know, there have been cosmetic changes, but the systems have not really changed. We still see the higher mortality rate, whether it's infant mortality rate, maternal mortality rate, or just the longevity of African people here in the United States. Certainly our longevity is less than the white population. We see that our wealth is 7 times less than the comparable white population. We see that 10 or 15% of the population, and we make up 40% of the prison population. So that we see that these systems are still oppressing us and not supporting us in terms of full citizenry and participation in economics and the welfare, shall we say, of the state. We're at the bottom of all of the statistics. So,
Yes.
so not enough has changed over 100 years.
Yes. So let's go to 1923, where he was wrongly convicted. What happened?
Basically, it was a political, trial, because Marcus Garvey, with his philosophy, Africa for the Africans, those at home and those abroad, and the fact that we can lift ourselves up by our own endeavor and by our own collective wealth and investment. He had attracted more than 6 million people at this point. And, he had a major convention in 1920 with 2,000 or more delegates from all over the African world coming to the United States of America, to Harlem, where the Liberty Hall was. That was the headquarters of the UNIA. He had a massive meeting at Madison Square Gardens that filled to capacity and overflowed into the street. There were parades, throughout down New York, etc., demonstrating the strength of the African community all over the world. Now, this was frightening to those people who had an ideology of white supremacy and wanted to continue the oppression of black people. So back in 1919, we have an internal memo from J. Edgar Hoover in what was to become the FBI, saying that there was an agitator, basically a black Moses up there in Harlem, and we have to agitate the people, and we have to find some way to get them. So J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI, they created the first black agents of the FBI, and they used them to infiltrate the Garvey movement. There was an attempt on his life in 1919, and then, false charges were brought against him in 1923 in terms of the major project that the UNI had, which was the Black Star Line, which was to unite people in Africa, in the Caribbean, and in the Americas in terms of trade, commerce, as well as movement. So this whole trial was an attempt to destabilize, if you will, the movement, to destroy the credibility of Marcus Garvey, and to destroy the major economic effort of the Black Star Line. And, basically, there was no evidence to prove any of the allegations. For example, it was supposed to be, the first indictment was supposed to be a conspiracy to defraud, and yet still there were no conspirators, because the other 4 defendants were released. So they were clearly focusing on Marcus Garvey. There was no fraud proven. There was no way for Marcus Garvey to profit independently of the Black Star Line being a profitable enterprise. So he was no different from any other investor. So no fraud could have been perpetrated. So there was no fraud. There was no evidence that Marcus Garvey was misleading the public with information, because they had only an empty envelope with no content. and the witness who was supposed to have sent the envelope or the material in the envelope couldn't remember what was in it. And then it was proven that he didn't work for the UNIA, and he was coached to lie by the prosecutor. So we have a prosecutor, attorney who's suborned and the witness, and we had a witness who committed perjury. We had a presiding judge who should have recused himself because he told lies about the organizations that he was involved with, because this was an organizational struggle basically for the minds of African people here in the United States, and he belonged to a rival integrationist organization. So his rulings were prejudicial to a fair trial for Marcus Garvey, and there was an all-white jury. And again, no crime was committed. So this was totally a frame-up.
So, Dr. Garvey, we know that earlier this year, Congress introduced a House resolution sponsored by New York Congresswoman Yvette Clarke. Tell us about that.
Yes, basically, Yvette Clarke, it was in February, has presented House Resolution 148. And she has other supporters such as Mr. Butterfield, Carson, Hastings, Sarah Lee of California, and Johnson of Texas, Meeks from Queens here, etc. She has several others who have came from New Jersey, Congress people who have supported the House resolution. So this is presently the House. And it's a resolution expressing the sense of the House of Representatives with respect to Marcus Garvey, that the trial was unfair, there was no fraud, and that he should be exonerated. And this is precisely what we're requesting. Now, this is going through the Congress, and the final resolution, as it states in the House Resolution 148, it says, resolved that it is the sense of the House of Representatives that Marcus Garvey was innocent of the charges brought against him by the United States government, one, and two, that Marcus Garvey was and should be recognized internationally as a leader and thinker in the struggle of human rights. And three, that the president should take appropriate measures within his power to exonerate Marcus Garvey and clear his good name. So that now is in the House and the House Judiciary Committee, and we'll see how far that goes in terms of its deliberations and conclusion.
Okay, so the Justice for Garvey effort is on Twitter at Justice for Garvey. And as you mentioned, seeking an exoneration of Marcus Garvey to clear his name by asking President Biden to grant a posthumous presidential pardon. How can our audience help support this effort? What can we do to make this happen?
Well, as you mentioned, they can go to our Twitter account, Justice for Garvey, Justice the number 4, Garvey, and sign a petition there to the president. And, also the best way to go about helping is directly to go to the White House. You can go directly out to the White House and sign a petition there to the President Biden. It's the online contact there is www.whitehouse.gov/contact, and you can directly request the president then to clear Marcus Garvey's name. So that's www.whitehouse.gov/contact, and that's directly to the president, and request that he clears Marcus Garvey's name with a posthumous pardon.
So, Dr. Garvey, we want to thank you so much for sharing this information with us. And, we are going to support your campaign, the campaign to get justice for Garvey. And we look forward to having you back again with news saying that the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey has been exonerated and his name is cleared and he takes his rightful place in history.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for your commitment.
You're very welcome. It's our pleasure, our honor.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. This segment was brought to you courtesy of Caribbean American Weekly, a newspaper owned and operated by Caribbean Americans. Read the latest edition at www.cawnyc.com. That's www.cawnyc.com. To like us on Facebook, to advertise or to subscribe, visit us at www.cawnyc.com. That's www.cawnyc.com. To advertise with the Caribbean American Weekly publication for freelance assignments to distribute at your business place, visit us at www.cawnyc.com. That's www.cawnyc.com. Or to meet a marketing representative at our office, call 718-771-0988. That's 718-771-0988.